You're listening to
Enphinity Radio.
Thanks for listening to Enphinity Radio. Today is Tuesday, March 7th, 2023, and I'm Javier Montoya. I'm here with my co-host, Carlos Wilder. Before we get started, I want to talk about EricRiveraMusic.com. A lot of exciting things happening on the website. So we have almost a full season of the Enphinity Radio program on the website. If you become a member right now, which is only $4.99 a month, you can subscribe to get 20% off all of our gear and merchandise on the website. So everything you order, every purchase will be 20% off. On top of that, you can have full access to the radio show, all of our content, including the music show, the talk podcast, and you can request your favorite music or your own music for the upcoming weekly music shows. And as well as being a member, everything on the website is free to view except for the upcoming virtual tour. But if you become a member, you can watch all of the live Eric Rivera performances coming up this summer. So there's going to be a full tour, and every performance will be available on the website to all of our members and subscribers, as well as all of the Enphinity Radio talk shows. So for today's episode, Carlos, I want to start with sports news. Good news for the Browns, I would say. We have released strong safety John Johnson III, which I think you called in one of our podcasts a few weeks ago. And this is to save some cap room. So according to Dog Pound Daily, the Cleveland Browns are currently about $15 million over the salary cap. And just from cutting John Johnson III, they're going to be able to save $9.8 million, which leaves about $7 million remaining to be found. Now, some of the more expensive players that they may be able to cut on the roster or renegotiate their contracts include Greg Newsome II, Jedrick Willis, Jordan Elliott, Harrison Bryant, Donovan Peoples-Jones, and obviously, they're talking about restructuring Deshaun Watson's contract. He got an enormous contract. I think it was the largest contract that was fully guaranteed in NFL history. And, he was suspended the first 11 weeks of the season, so we really didn't get to see much of his performance on the field. But that's going to be next year. Now, to replace John Johnson III, the Browns are already looking at one of the Bengals safeties. I think his name was Bates III, and he has already expressed a willingness to play in Cleveland. So I think this is some good news for the Browns. What do you think?
Well, he was all pro. He's like one of the premier free agents that's going on the market this offseason. I know Cincinnati's trying to keep him, but I'm not sure about the number of players that they have to sign and whether they'll have the money to keep him.
Yeah, so Deshaun Watson's contract was, like I said at the top, one of the biggest in NFL history. I think it was like, $200 million?
Yeah, it's all guaranteed. If they cut him or whatever, if he gets hurt, he still gets that whole $230 million. It's the first time in history that any player's ever got a completely guaranteed contract.
Now, he's near the end of his career. I mean, he's not a spring chicken. So why do you think they spent so much on him?
Well, I think the Browns just were desperate, and they said, we're going all in, because they knew Baker Mayfield was not the answer. And so they were competing against Atlanta to get this Watson guy. He was going to go to Atlanta. So the Browns, they said, well, we're going to go all in. We'll guarantee your whole salary.
Which is kind of how it goes always for the Browns. We put all of our hopes and all of our chips in one basket. We put all of the hopes for every season on, a new quarterback. And I think that's what they did. They got all the money that they could put together, and they threw it at him and said, hey, come finish your career up here.
Sure. And he took it. Because it's different in football because it's such a violent sport, and guys, get career-ending injuries so often that they go for that money when they can, because they know that there's no guarantees of tomorrows in football, like basketball or baseball, where they're not as heavy of a contact sport. So he went for it.
And the contracts just keep getting crazier and crazier because, you talk about $230 million for a quarterback, but even in baseball, Baseball players might get paid more than that. I could see in a few years they get paid $1 billion a year to play the sport of baseball because there's no salary cap.
Sure. But I think that they're talking about in the collective bargaining agreement, some of the owners of the smaller markets are starting to complain, and they want to institute some type of salary cap. Well, basically, a guy can come in, and whoever's got the most money will have the best team. And that's why like teams like the New York Yankees and the LA Dodgers and the larger market teams, they're dominating the sport because they can afford to pay the most. I mean, look at what was the guy from Cleveland, Francisco Lindor. They lost him to the New York Mets because that billionaire owner, he came in and bought the team, and he offered him the most money. He got some like $200 and some odd $1 million contract, $250 million. Indians couldn't afford to pay that.
No, and every sport should have a salary cap.
They should, because it evens the playing field. It makes for more parity around the leagues, because then everybody's basically spending the same amount of money, and you can compete for the talent better.
So the Browns need to make cuts elsewhere on the roster. They're talking about renegotiating contract with Greg Newsome II, Jedrick Willis, Myles Garrett. I mean, I think they need to hold on to all those guys. What do you think?
Well, they are. Those are two other players that they're considering stepping to them and saying, hey, let me restructure your contract. And all they're basically doing is they're just backloading money that they owe them, so they can, reduce the amount that they owe them like this year, so they can get under that salary cap. So they're going to pay him the money just like Deshaun Watson. He's going to get every dime of that $230 million. It's just a matter of when do they pay it to him. And then I think there's a way they can get around it. They can take some of the salary and convert it to bonuses or something like that, where it doesn't apply toward the salary cap. So they do stuff like that, little creative things to get up under the salary cap.
Or you can thank the players union to make sure they get every single dime that they're owed.
Oh yeah, sure.
Now switching to the NBA, big news in the league is the LeBron James injury. He's going to be out for at least 3 weeks. As it stands today, Lakers are 9th in the West. Record is 32-34. Then you have the Pelicans at 31-34, Thunders 31-34, the Trailblazers 31-34, and the Jazz 31-35. So a very competitive Western Conference this season. And you have the Cavs in the Eastern Conference. They're currently number 4 in the East with a record of 41-26. This is the best season for the Cavs that I can remember in quite some time. As far as the Lakers go, the end of the stretch season's going to be real crucial for him this year. So you think this LeBron James injury was for real, or you think this is a way for him to end his season early?
No, I actually think he wants to play, but he genuinely has an injury, and they were trying to fight to get into at least the play-in tournament.
So remind me, how's the play-in tournament go again?
Well, the way they restructured the playoffs now, the 1 through 6 seeds are guaranteed. They're in the playoffs. 7, 8, 9, and 10, they have to play in for the last 2 spots.
Okay.
Because there's only 8 spots. So the 7 through 10, they have like a little playoff where the 2 teams meet against each other. I think 7 and 10 play, and 8 and 9 play each other. Then the winners of those games, they can play again to see who's going to be the 7th and 8th seeds. So
okay, so that's more competitive than I thought. So as it stands right now, the Lakers have a real strong chance of making it in.
Yeah, that's why LeBron, felt they had a chance, and they still do. They still do have a chance to get in. It's just that injury bug, man. I tell you, it's something else. And if he hits at the wrong time, the Golden State Warriors, Steph Curry has been out injured a couple times this year, and they're basically a 500 team right now. Whereas if he was playing the whole season, they were predicted to repeat as the champions. Now they're picking other teams because Golden State is so far behind, And, they won't have home court advantage or anything like that. So it's a much tougher road to try to get to the championship.
And you and I had never got to talk about the Kevin Love trade. So Kevin Love's off the Cavs now. He was with the team for quite some time. How do you think that's going to affect the team in the playoff stretch?
I really don't think much. I don't know what happened to him this year, but I think he's had some injuries to his, I can't remember if it was his hand or his thumb. I think he had a thumb injury. And he hasn't been shooting the ball well this year at all. And he's always been a defensive liability. He's been starting in Miami, and he's bombing out down there. He's not doing well at all. He's not shooting the ball well, and he's a good rebounder, but he's not much of a defensive player. He's a liability on that side of the ball. So I think that's why the Cavs decided to move on from him, because he just can't play defense anymore.
And I can recall when he first came to Cleveland, even the real early parts of his career when he was in Minnesota, he was a star. He was one of the best in the league, hands down, year after year. And, he kind of fizzled out over the last few years, which a lot of guys in the NBA do. The stars in college, seems like a lot of them come from Duke. They, they're real ball players in college, and then when they get to the pros, they don't quite live up to the expectations.
Yeah, I think that, one of the things about coming to Cleveland is that playing with LeBron James and then Kyrie Irving was here, like you sort of have to, sacrifice. You sort of have to sacrifice your game, and you're not the number one option anymore. You're like number 3. LeBron's number 1, Kyrie was number 2, so he didn't get the number of shots that he was getting before he came here, and etc. So his number is going to suffer because of that. And he never was going to be the superstar that he was up in Minnesota before he came to the Cavs. But I don't think he cared. He just wanted to win championships. And they got one, but they probably could have had more if him and Kyrie hadn't been hurt that first year that they went to the finals. But
now, how many rings does LeBron have now? I can't remember.
I think he's got 4 now. If you count that, I don't count it. I don't acknowledge it. I say it's the scrimmage. That year they had the bubble championship, but he won that year, so that gave him 4 total. He got 2 in Miami, 1 here in Cleveland, and he got that bubble championship with the Lakers.
I feel like he won't be satisfied till he has 6 like MJ.
Well, I think that's what he's trying to do. I think his logic is that if he could get up to 6 championships, which is the number that MJ has, that there would be no debate about who the GOAT is.
Sure, you'd be the all-time scorer in the league. You'd have as many championships as MJ, but the argument was always MJ was a better defensive player.
Well, the thing,
that he was the all-around guy and just all-NBA.
Yeah, he was all-NBA. He played more defense than LeBron, but you got to think about it this way, Javi. The way I look at it, the reason why I put MJ at the top is because MJ was 6-0. When he went to the finals, every last time he went, he won. LeBron's record in championships is 4-6. He's below 500. Can you imagine, just listen, if you had a boxing champion and you had one champion that was undefeated every time he fought a championship fight, he won. But here you got another guy who was champion 4 times, but he got whooped 6 times. How can you consider yourself the GOAT if you lost so many times, trying to become a champion? And I think that's why I don't think he'll ever, in a lot of people's eyes, he'll never be considered the GOAT compared to MJ, because MJ never lost.
Right. And that's a good comparison. A lot of people in football talk about Tom Brady as the GOAT. And yes, he has won a lot of Super Bowls, but I'll take you all the way back to even before the NFL was the NFL. It was the AFL. And there was a quarterback by the name of Otto Graham who played for the Cleveland Browns. And he played 10 seasons in the league, every single season he took them to the championship, and they won 7 out of 10 of those championships. So, yeah, he wasn't undefeated, but with a record like that, definitely competes for the greatest of all time, as far as I'm concerned.
Sure. I think if LeBron had a record like that, like if he'd have won 7 out of the 10 or something like that, I think it would be no conversation that he's a GOAT. But when you have a losing record in championship competition, that doesn't fare too well for you. And that's why a lot of people consider Joe Montana with the San Francisco 49ers, because I think he was undefeated. I think he was 4-0 or something like that. He went 4 times. He won every time he went to the Super Bowl. He's never lost a Super Bowl.
You know, and the Super Bowl, it's a different kind of pressure, you know. And even if you've been there and your coach has been there and your fans have been there, you're working and playing with a lot of players who this might be their first time in the Super Bowl, let alone the playoffs. So to come around and say, you know, I've been here before, I know how to handle this pressure. You got 54 other guys in the room who might not be able to handle it as smooth as you can.
Yeah, that speaks volumes when you can be that good, because that's when the pressure is on, you know, especially football, because this winner go home, you know. At least in basketball, you got the best of 7, so you could lose 3 times and still win a championship.
So we're about halfway through the program. I want to switch to news. The big story of the week in politics this week is the Supreme Court. Now, the Biden administration has rolled out a student loan relief plan. What they want to do is allow borrowers to wipe clean up to $10,000 of their debt if they had a student loan, and up to $20,000 of their debt if they had a Pell Grant. Now, the Supreme Court, which is mostly conservative justices, Chief Justice John Roberts is making a case in which, you know, because this affects so many Americans and because it costs so much money, the Biden administration should go through the Congress to do something like this. Now, the administration's argument is, well, we paused the student loan payments during the pandemic, and because of the pandemic, we have this executive authority which allows us to do this without going through Congress. You know, they also argue that if they continue the student loan payments now, after this long 3-year pause, delinquencies will skyrocket. You know, and now that they've made the promise of wiping out the student loan debt, to renege on that promise would be catastrophic. The Biden administration estimates the program would cost up to $400 billion over 30 years, and up to 26 million Americans have already signed up for the assistance. My personal opinion on it, I think it's unconstitutional. I don't think that the Biden administration even has the authority to do this, and I think that's what the Supreme Court will decide. I also just don't think it's equitable. You know, if you went to college in the 90s or the 2000s, 2010s, you had to pay all your student loans back. Everybody was required to pay their student loans back. But just because you happened to attend college during these certain years, you get your debt wiped clean? That's not fair.
Well, I can sort of see your point, but the point that or the point that I see is that, you know, this whole thing came about because of the pandemic and COVID and so on and so forth. Now, I see politicians in Congress like this Marjorie Taylor Greene or whatever her name is, etc. Now, she got PPP loans that they gave loan forgiveness on. She's got like $700,000-800,000 that was forgiven. So you're going to sit around here and get mad about somebody getting $10,000 forgiven on a school loan? There's nowhere near what you got. And these loans were forgiven because of the pandemic, those PPP loans. So I'm saying if you're going to do it on one side of the coin, you should do it on the other, and it's only $10,000. You know, when I'm going to take you back to an earlier podcast we had when we were talking about the IT and the medical profession, and when I worked in the hospitals, training doctors and et cetera on software. Like, I would talk to a lot of the residents and et cetera that I was helping. And do you realize that the average doctor or resident, when they go through med school, they're $500,000 in debt with school loans. So you mean to tell me that instead of paying $400,000 back, you pay $390? That's not even that's not even a dent in the debt that they owe. But I'm saying that all these people that are whining about the student loan forgiveness, if you got your loan forgive on like a PPP or something that was also related to the pandemic, you need to shut up. Because $10,000 is nothing compared to what a lot of people got forgiven for on those PPP loans. So I think it's unfair for them to scrutinize one type of loan forgiveness and then not the other. Both sides of the coin. It should be unilateral. They shouldn't have forgiven the PPP loans.
Well, in my opinion, they shouldn't even have given those PPP loans. A lot of money went out during the pandemic that was very unnecessary. They should never have closed down businesses in order to print money to give to those businesses to let them open back up. They should have just let them stay open to begin with, but I guess that ship has sailed. As far as this case is concerned, I don't know. I'm under the belief that regardless, they're going to rule it down as unconstitutional, and a lot of people will be disappointed.
I do too. I feel they're going to say it's unconstitutional. But like I said, the amount that they're talking about forgiving, it's not going to help a lot of people out tremendously as it is. $10,000 is nothing. Like my ex-wife, she's got $50,000 worth of school loans now. And $10,000, if you subtract that, she still owes $40,000.
Wow.
So it's not like it's wiping the slate clean. Now, to me, like if they came and said, everybody that got school loans, we're going to wipe their slate clean, and they don't owe the government anything. That's one measure there, but to sit there and say we'll give you a $10,000 break, it's sort of like a little discount to me, but I realize there are a lot of school loans out there, a lot of people, and that it would cost the government, a lot of money to just...
Yeah, they estimate $400 billion over 30 years.
Wow.
But then again, how many billions of dollars were spent on the CARES Act and the PPP and all that other stuff? Trillions.
I don't know the numbers on that. I know they gave quite a bit out as part of that stimulus package. And then that's only the PPPs. They had the EIDLs that they gave out as well. And I think on some of those, there was some type of forgiveness.
EIDL, what's that?
Yeah, the EIDL was another loan, part of the stimulus package from the pandemic. I forget what the acronym is, emergency something loan, what the EIDL stands for. But they came out with those the same time they came out with the PPP loans. So they got quite a bit of debt from the EIDL loans. And then the thing about it that was so sad, Javi, it was just widespread fraud. People were getting these loans and going out and doing whatever with the money. Because
there was no oversight.
There was no oversight. They didn't ask for any kind of documentation or anything. You could go online and apply for one of those loans in 5 minutes. And you just would plug in how much your company made and your tax ID number, the name of your company, the LLC, and when it was founded and so on and so forth. And they were giving money out. That's why so many people got away with money on them, because they weren't even asking.
And that's another argument that the Republicans make is there is no oversight when all these government spending bills are passed, and when they increase spending, they never cut spending elsewhere, or they never increase taxes to make up for the spending. And I think that's the big issue, the big dilemma you come to terms with in America is there's no trust between the people and their government. So if the government wants to increase taxes to increase services, the people are naturally going to be skeptical, naturally going to be, well, what are you going to do with that money? You're just going to create a new program. You're just going to increase your own salaries, whatever. If you had an oversight system in which, the government was required to tell the people, okay, yes, we're going to collect more money than we did last year, but this is what we're going to spend the money on, X, Y, Z. And this is how we're going to cut the spending in another place to balance the budget. I mean, the last time the budget was even balanced in this country was in the 90s under the Clinton administration. So in my entire lifetime, we've never had a balanced budget. And a lot of the states, they have laws that require them to balance their budgets in their constitutions. But the United States government, they're not required to balance the budget, so they could run deficits as large as they want. $1 trillion a year, $2 trillion a year, whatever they want to call it. So, in this country, we have to acknowledge that there's no longer even an effort to balance the budget, it seems, from either party.
Right.
There's no longer an effort to focus on the debt, to focus on the actual drivers of the debt, which is Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. They might not even be around, when I'm ready to collect the benefits. So if we don't make some serious changes today, it's going to be too late.
I personally feel that the government, first and foremost, has a duty of responsibility to institute programs and et cetera for the poor and the needy, the people that are in need of it, and if you're going to trim the fat from the budget and try to balance it, try getting rid of a lot of the programs that are just excessive and, there's really not as much of a need for the poor and needy and the downtrodden of the country, Now, that's one thing that Donald Trump did that I was just totally against when he gave a tax cut to the rich, to the wealthy. What does a wealthy person need with a tax break? They're rich. If you're going to give a tax break to anybody, give it to some poor people. The rich folks don't need a tax cut, and things like that.
And that was a large tax cut on corporations, too. They brought the corporate tax rate down from 35% to 21%, which was the largest, I would assume, cut in the corporate tax in quite a long time. If you don't want to increase taxes, another way you could do it would be restructure the way they collect taxes in America. We've been collecting income taxes since 1900s, I think the 1913s or the 19-teens. That clearly hasn't been working. We're not raising enough revenue to pay for the services in this country. We're running a deficit, so why don't we try to tax in a different way? For example, other countries do what's called a VAT tax, VAT. That's a value-added tax. So that would tax you on everything that you purchase versus your income that you produce. Another way you could do that would be perhaps targeted taxes on corporations, like carbon taxes. You could put a price on carbon emissions or polluting corporations. You could put a tax on industrial cleanup or industrial waste. You could tax imports larger, the way we used to do in this country. Through tariffs, so there's a whole host of ways to do it, but the fact of the matter is, the way they're taxing the citizens today is just simply not working.
Well, there's no doubt that taxes need to go up, and people kill me because they're clamoring and crying for, they want more and more services from the government, they want more police, more, law enforcement, etc. Well, this costs money. So, given a budget that's constant, how are you going to increase all these things that the government provides unless you raise taxes? Something has to go up to try to provide these funds for all these increased services and et cetera. So people, they, like the word, tax increase, it's like, cursing to them. They don't want to hear it. They want more and more, but they don't want to pay for it. And the bottom line is that you get what you pay for. If you don't pay that much, you're not going to get that much. There's going to be crime in the streets, going to be potholes all in the pavement, so on and so forth, If you want good quality services, you have to pay for it.
Now, there was a report this week released by the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction. And in that report, they were talking about the way the war in Afghanistan ended, which was in August of 2021. And the report points to several causes for the chaos which ensued, but number one was the deal which was reached by the Trump administration and the Taliban back in 2020. And the Special Inspector General's report says that the deal made between the Trump administration and the Taliban led to a situation of miscommunication and confusion. Now, in the days leading up to our exit, we had something like 100,000 Afghans that we airlifted out of the country. These were people who worked with our soldiers. They were translators. They were contractors. And we were able to get 100,000 people out of that country before the Taliban took over. Some people did not make it out. And the Taliban did take that country back over. So in essence, we did lose that war. $7 billion of military equipment was left behind in Afghanistan. And it's estimated that over 20 years of war, $90 billion in international money was spent in Afghanistan. So that's just some numbers that I wanted to run down because they were absolutely astounding.
I said it before. In war, there's no winners or losers, in my opinion. Look at all the money that was spent there in 20 years. And in essence, we
lost the war.
You lost the war, went into the hands of the enemy. And, all that money just, for naught. Nothing went, and the end result was nothing was accomplished. And war is costly in terms of monetarily and in human lives that are lost. So I'm happy that the U.S. pulled out of there. I don't like to see war anywhere on any front. This war in Ukraine is costing our country a lot of money. It's costly.
Sure. I mean, you had the war in Korea, the war in Vietnam, the Gulf War, the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq. Now you have Ukraine. One thing I can say about Joe Biden, though, he did promise that he would get out of Afghanistan when he was running for president, and that's a promise that he did keep. I remember when Donald Trump was running back in 2016, his campaign promise was he would get us out of these Middle East wars. He was going to withdraw from Afghanistan. And then I think it was first year of his term, he made a televised speech in which he said, yeah, I know I promised we'd get it out of Afghanistan, but I've changed my mind. I've talked to the generals, I've evaluated the situation, and we're going to stay. And I just lost a lot of respect for Trump after he made that speech. But I'll tell you, regardless of how they got out, it was going to be sloppy, it was going to be messy. But at the end of the day, one person decided to get out and the other person didn't.
Sure. And, he just had to cut bait and just do it. And, like you said, there's no smooth transition. I'm sure when they ended the war in Vietnam, there was a lot of stuff that was left behind, a lot of things, left, hanging loose and unresolved. But that's, there's no easy way to transition from war to peace times. So I'm like you. I commend Biden for ending the war. He got criticized on some fronts, but it's over now, and there's no resources or anything being spent over there. There's no lives being lost over there any longer. So that's a good thing.
Now we have time for one more subject. I wanted to end the program today on quite a somber note. I wrote an article in my blog last week about the casualties in the Russo-Ukrainian War. We're now over a year since that war has begun, and it's been an absolutely horrific, tragic situation. It's the worst humanitarian crisis in Europe since World War II. It's estimated that over 100,000 Russians have been injured or killed on the battlefield since this war began. It's also estimated that Russian casualty numbers are around the same. The difference being Ukraine has civilian casualties, whereas Russia has none, since the war has not spilled over into Russian sovereign territory. Now, we have seen 2 Polish civilians killed in this war back in November, and it's not quite certain how they were killed or with which kind of weapons they were killed, who created those weapons, but If we were to see the Russo-Ukrainian war spill over into Poland or Moldova or Romania or any of the other NATO countries in Europe, that would change the dynamic of the situation completely. Obviously in war, there's a fog of war, and it's real difficult to ascertain which numbers are correct, which ones are propaganda. Fact of the matter is, one life lost is too many, and it's hard to see an end of this war coming soon. In just 1 year, Russia has taken 1/7, perhaps 1/6 of the land area of Ukraine, including large swaths of the eastern country, including the Donbass. Russia also managed to hold on to the Crimean Peninsula, which they took without firing a bullet back in 2014. So, not only does Russia now have access to the Black Sea through the Crimean Peninsula, they now have wheat production, they have steel production, they have coal production, all from Ukraine, and they still have their oil and natural gas coming from Russia proper. And a lot of these commentators, they talk about, the big effect that the European tariffs have had on Russia and how we've limited the amount of oil and gas that we've imported from Russia. But what I can say is this. India has increased their oil purchases from Russia. China has stepped up their trade with Russia. Russia has allies in South Africa, in Myanmar, in Turkey. Russia has allies in Belarus. Not only that, they now have large swaths of the Ukrainian territory, which is high in industrial production. So I don't know where this war leads next. All we can do is hope and pray that it ends soon, it ends today, it ends peacefully, and it ends justly. And we can only pray and hope that the United States and our allies do not get pulled into the conflict.
You're listening to
Enphinity Radio.